Hey everybody, Michael here with Game Changers. Welcome back for another episode of Filthy Friday. This week we have an Xbox One X. Now these guys are not known for having issues with overheating, and they're not really known for having the same kind of dust buildup problems that you get in PS4s. Most of the time when you see an Xbox One overheat, it's either an issue with the thermal compound getting old and grody, or with the clamp that holds the cooling system up against the processor, kind of loosening up, getting a little weaker, not applying the force that it needs to apply to do its job. So I'm willing to bet that because of the design of the Xbox One is a little bit more open design on the inside, it's not going to be quite as much of a dust buildup issue, but let's take a look, see what we can find. Come along. All right, so here's the system itself. Let's take a look, see what we can see. Looking pretty clean on the outside. For the little bits that you can see through the vents, I'm not seeing a lot of buildup. Makes me think my suspicions are probably right on this one. We're probably dealing with something other than a dust buildup issue. But let's go ahead and get these screws out of here, and we'll crack the top off and take a look. So this slides forward, and then you have to lift one side carefully. There's a bit of a trick to it, but practice makes perfect, so comes right off. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of dust build up right here. Let's move it around a little bit. Get you guys a little better angle here. So when you are disassembling these, you got to really be careful about this part. This is the number one thing we see people mess up on. So you get these two screws here, and then this just needs to pop straight up. If you pull it to the side, or if you're too rough with it, you can damage the connector in there. It's just a little piece of plastic. So straight up, nice and careful, nice and slow. And then once it's let go, you can pull it over to the side. You can see there's just a little plastic connector in there with a bunch of little pins. If that gets damaged, your front USB won't work anymore. You'll have permanently ruined it. So please be careful if you ever do this at home. All right, let's get the rest of these screws. These are long screws that go all the way through. I like to pull those out first. And then up here on the front, we've got this little ribbon connector here for the eject button. It's its own separate piece. So we'll just pull that out really delicately. Just, get the ribbon out of the way. That is connected to the bottom half of the shell along with this USB connector. Those are both on the bottom half. So you need to make sure that they're out of your way before you pull this thing apart. And we'll just pull just like that. And then it slides up towards the front there. Comes right off. As you can see, these are going right. Oh, we got a little dust buildup right there, so I think we're starting to see a little bit of filth here. Now we've got these two screws right here and here that hold this half of the shell on, and this just comes right up. It takes a little bit of doing. Now on the back here, you'll look, there's a couple of little gaskets here that help form a seal and hold everything in place, and you don't want to lose those down in there, so you got to kind of be careful while you're pulling it out. These little guys right here, these sometimes they'll get stuck down in there, and you'll have to reach down and pull them out separately. So you guys got to be careful for that. This is what they look like right here. They come off of there, just slide on and off, and if they get jammed down in there, you got to get the tweezers and pull them out. So make sure you check, make sure they're all there, all the way across. Oh, our fan is looking nice. It's not too bad. There is a layer of dust built up on it. Let me see if I can get you guys a better look at it here. Oh, got a little dust build up around the outer edges. So, okay, it's a little worse than it looked like from the outside. A little bit of a surprise inside. The fan does seem to be spinning properly, but it is kind of caked in a layer of dust here. So now that we've got it all apart, we're going to pull the rest of these screws out of here. Technically, you could have pulled these out when we did the long boys, but out of habit, I like to pull the whole thing in half before I start disconnecting all the components. So this is usually going to be the screws for, you know, the hard drive, the disk drive, the power supply, and the heatsink. So now that those are all unscrewed, we have to pull the disk drive out of the way. So it sits a little bit on top of the power supply, and then we just snap that up. There's a little connector in there. You just gotta go straight up. And that is connected across the fan and fan shroud, which you do have to disconnect the fan, and it all comes straight up. Let's see how we're looking in there. Yeah, there's just a light layer of dust all the way through there. We'll get that cleaned up, but I don't think that's what's causing our overheating here. We'll set that aside for now. Unplug the SATA connector and the power cable for the Blu-ray drive. That comes out, and then the hard drive has a SATA and power cable just the same way, and it comes right up out of there. Ooh, got a little bit of dust buildup on there. Got these screws up on the front and the side for these little antenna and faceplate connectors. It's our wireless module and our front panel. Alright, let's take a look. Oh, the heatsink does have a couple of little dust bunnies built up on there, so we'll get those out of there. Let's lift this board out. Try to go straight up as much as possible. I lift the front first and then kind of slide it out. Alright. So all in all, not the filthiest looking console. It does have some blockage in there. We'll go ahead and hit that with the compressor and everything, but I don't think that's what's causing our overheating. That should be enough to get it a little toasty, get the fan spinning a bit, but not enough to shut the whole thing down. So I don't think it's a dust related issue here. So we need to lift it straight up and out of the way. So on the other side here, you see this little X clamp. We need to remove this, but it's very tricky. This is probably the hardest part of the whole repair, and you can accidentally destroy the board if you're not careful. So I'm going to get a little flathead screwdriver, and now the trick is not to put pressure so that if it slips, it smashes the board, scrapes up all these traces, knocks components off. We don't want that. So we're going to put our finger in the way, and we're going to be careful only to pry downward and twist. We're not going to press forward at all. We're just going to lift these off of these little posts here. We don't want to have the screwdriver slip and scratch across the board, so we're going to take our time. We're going to do it carefully. Once we get one of them up, we just make sure that it's all the way up towards one side here as much as it can, and pry carefully, not forward, backward. So make sure we don't put any pressure that could cause that tip to slip out of there. So just down, and then once it's about where you want it, twist it to give yourself a little bit more leverage without having to press. Once you've got those two off, we can go ahead and just push, and the other two should come right off. Be delicate and gentle. If you've gotten this off, you've gotten through the hardest part of the whole repair, so give yourself a pat on the back. Alright, so we're just going to give these little posts a press here just to give them a little bit of pressure, and it should cause the thermal compound to release. There we go, looking good. Alright, so the board itself's not looking too bad, but we're going to go ahead and clean this old crusty thermal compound off of there. The stuff they use at the factory, both at Microsoft and at Sony, is kind of the bottom of the barrel thermal compound. I don't like to leave it on there ever. if I can justify tearing the system down to replace it, but especially if it's overheating. Sometimes the stuff getting old and crusty and not transferring heat properly can be enough to cause the whole system to overheat and throw an error message, shut itself off, and the whole shebang, just ruin your whole day. So we'll go ahead and clean as much of this off of there as we can. The important part is that dye in the middle. You can leave a little bit around the edges, it'll be fine, but we want to clean it up as best we can. Don't be too rough around those edges because those little components there can get pulled off if you're not careful. We just want to clean the dye as much as we can. Get a little rubbing alcohol on there. Kind of thins out the compound, makes it easier to scrape it up. Make sure we give it a nice dry rub as well. All right, so the dye is looking good. We're gonna need to clean these up as well. That green thermal clay stuff they put on here, you don't ever really need to replace that, but it does leave a little bit of residue on here. And when we put it back together, I want it to get a nice good thermal connection. So I'm just gonna give these a little scrub, make sure that we got a nice clean surface for it to re-adhere to. Same with these guys over here. Yeah, that's for all this green clay over here. You don't really need to replace that ever. It doesn't cause issues. But this right here we will be replacing. So make sure we don't lose any of this though. Make sure it doesn't come off of there and go missing. All right, so on the heatsink side, we just need to get that nice and clean. Scrape all the thick, chunky bits off of there. Ugh. It's hard, it's dry, and it's way too much to begin with, so dump that out. I don't know why they gobbed so much of this cheap thermal compound on there. There is such a thing as too much. Thermal compound's one of those things where the law of diminishing returns can actually go all the way out the negative. So you add more, and instead of it making it a tiny bit better, it actually starts to make it worse the more you add once you get to a certain point. So a little bit silly that they just gob it on there, but what can you do? A little rubbing alcohol, make sure it's nice and clean. And I'm going to go ahead and hit everything with that air compressor. Be right back. All right. Post compressor, this is looking nice and clear. I'm going to get you a little better angle here. There we go. No blockages. The little bit that was in there is all cleaned up and gone. It didn't give us too much of a fight. This little piece in the middle here presses up against the bottom of the processor, pushes it into the heatsink and holds it in place so that it can transfer the heat into the cooling system. These legs here get a little bit weak, so we're just gonna bend them just a little bit. Don't bend them too much, just the tiniest little bit, and that's gonna apply more pressure here so that when we get the new thermal compound on there, it'll get a nice good seal. It'll get a really good connection between the processor and the heatsink. And I believe that's honestly what was causing the overheating here, is this clamp. It's an old design. It's the same one that they used in the 360 more or less, and we all know how that turned out. So here we go, thermal compound, little dab will do ya. And then this little bit of thermal clay, we're just gonna move it over. Sometimes it'll fall out of place when we try to flip the heatsink over, so I just like to set it on the board and then put the heat sink down where it goes. Line the 4 post holes up and make sure we don't put it on, take it off, put it on. We're going to do it in one motion. We don't want to froth up that thermal compound at all, get any air at all in there. Give it a nice good firm press, and then we're going to go ahead and put our clamp back on. Now with this guy, now that we're putting it back on, it's a little bit easier than taking it off. We don't have to use the screwdriver. We just need to get all 4 ends on the right spot and press down until they connect. So if you cannot get it to connect, it's possible that you may have bent it too much, but we're just going to give it a nice good line up here, and then on the other side, press it down until it clicks. Click. There we go. And once we've got 2 opposite ends, we'll hit the other 2, one at a time. Click and click. Make sure that they're lined up in their little slots there. If you push them too hard, they'll actually go past the click point where they lock in. So you need to make sure that the actual latch is in place. And we're all set. Now it's applying a lot of pressure in the middle. Should hold that thermal compound, that heat sink, and that processor all together in a nice little sandwich. We're gonna grab the bottom plate here, and before I like to go any further, I like to go ahead and screw the actual heatsink itself into this plate. Make sure that we have absolutely no wiggle at all. And when we put this on there, this little post right here and right here tend to not line up properly. If you're not getting a good seat there, if it's not going all the way down, make sure that those little posts are in place, and give it a little air puff here to get a little bit of dust straggling behind. So yeah, make sure these 2 posts are going through their holes, and then everything else should line up nicely. Let's flip it over and get those screws in there. Make sure that we want to keep this heat sink in place. Let's get these screws in there. Still baffles me that they use in the old Xbox 360 X clamp design after how much of a failure and how much of a disaster that was, but got it all lined up. And everything is secured, so we'll go ahead and put these back on. Now this has our button for our power, and it has our, I believe, sync and our connector for our eject. This is our Bluetooth and Wi-Fi board here. Now the hard drive was looking a little bit crusty. It's got a little bit of dust buildup. And one thing I see all the time in both Xboxes and PS4s is if they get a little bit toasty and they maintain kind of a high temperature, not enough to overheat the system and shut it off, but just enough to keep it warm, like a little oven in there. The hard drive hates that. They go out all the time. So we're going to take these 4 screws out. That comes out. This little back piece just slides off. We're going to plug that into our tester and make sure the hard drive is good. We don't want to get it back together and find out we have to take it all the way back apart again and replace the hard drive. So we'll pull up Crystal Disk and see what we can see here. It's got old information up, so I got to hit rescan. Give me 1 sec. There we go. And it's looking good. So it's got a lot of power on counts, but the power on hours aren't too bad. It usually lasts about 10 to 15 times that long, and our health status is good. All right, so that hard drive's a good hard drive. Let's go ahead and get it back in there. Oh, we gotta eject it from the computer. Don't want to break it during testing. Here we go. So we're just gonna reassemble it the way it came out. So plug the connector in, put it back on the little mount there, put the 4 screws in, and then we're all set. So we're going to line this up as nicely as we can. You'll see in a minute, it doesn't stay there until we screw it in, and that's going to be a little bit of an adventure because there's a bit of a gap there, but for now, we're just going to try to get all 4 post holes lined up nicely as best we can. Once that's in there, we got to connect the Blu-ray drive. So we'll give it a little scrub here. There's a little bit of dust buildup on the sides of it. So we plug the connectors in, and then we just pull this drive down out of the way so we can get the power supply and the fan module back in there. So it just needs to be scooched out of the way. And then this guy, well, looking a lot better. And once the air compressor hit it, it's nice and clean now. Give it a good blowout and a good scrub. So gonna get a little bit more of a puff there and got it looking good. So now to get this in place, we've got the fan connector, we've got the connector for the power supply, which is a couple of posts underneath, and then we've got this little bugger right here. This piece does not like to line up right, and it is kind of free floating there, so it can be a little bit tricky. I'll show you from the other side here, but we got to plug in the fan. Don't forget to plug in the fan. If you get your system all cleaned out and put it back together and it overheats immediately, you might have forgotten to plug in the fan. So make sure we get that in there. Okay, that goes right on top there, and we just make sure everything is secure. Now let's look at the other side of that connector I was telling you about. This is where the power cord plugs in, and this thing does not like to line up nicely. It kind of free floats on a little hook off of the fan shroud, and to get this in place, I like to flip it over, grab a pair of tweezers, and just kind of line up the screw holes with the holes in the frame, and then kind of apply some downward pressure. So you've got the two screw holes and then two little notches that come through the holes underneath it. Get in place. Scooty scoot, scoot. And almost. Take your time. Don't press too hard. Oh, there we go. So once those two nubs go through the hole right there and right there, that guides it in place, and then the other two screw holes will be lined up, everything will be in place, and the whole unit will come down. It's kind of clunk down up against the frame where it needs to be. So let's go ahead and screw everything in. We've got all the pieces where they need to be. Let's just put the screws back in. All right, now here's what I was talking about with the hard drive. When you flip it over like this to put the screws in, it kind of dangles. So we're gonna pick it up and try to line up this hole with the hole in the frame. We're lifting the actual hard drive. Got my finger kind of stuck in between the layers there, pushing up on the hard drive. Once we have one in most of the way, we don't have to tighten the screw all the way. We should be able to line up that other one down on the bottom right. And the screw itself, when you tighten it, will lift the hard drive up against the frame where it needs to be. There we go. So once those two are in, you should be all set. Be nice and seated where it belongs. There we go. So next up, we've got this plate here. These little gaskets, like I mentioned, need to squeeze down into there. We want to make sure we get them lined up. We've got a little thing on the front here that needs to go around the disk drive. And then once we've got that in place, I like to kind of give a little pressure right here so that these squeeze through and don't snag on that plastic frame. All right, that's nice and secure. Once everything's in place, we'll put these two screws back in. And yeah, our workspace needs to get cleaned up. In 1 second. Alrighty, so next up we have the outer shell here. We're gonna clean that a bit, wipe it down, and so when we go to put this in, we need to make sure the eject button and the front USB are out of the way. They don't get crushed up underneath there or put in a way where we can't reach them. As you can see, this little ribbon here goes all the way over to a little board there for the eject button. These slots right here connect to these little nubs here on the disk drive, and that's what holds it all in place so that it lines up and the disk doesn't scrape against the outer shell. So I like to put this down nicely like that, and to get them all to line up, I find that I have to kind of lift the whole system this way. I don't know how or why it works, but it always goes right into place when I do that. So that's what I do. Now we need to get this ribbon cable in place and locked down. That's our eject. Click. Everything is lined up nicely here, and now we've got this connector. This is the one that everybody breaks, so be very careful. Do not just slap it into place. Definitely do not try to get it in place by screwing it. Got to line it up, click it down, and then screw it. So line up the holes very carefully, and then it should click without a lot of force. You don't want to crush that connector, and then, yep, it's nice and secure now. So do not over tighten these screws. You have to be gentle and delicate, because that connector, like I said, is plastic, and this metal plate here and these metal screws can put an ungodly amount of force on it and just completely crumble that connector. And if that happens, there's not really any viable way to replace it. You pretty well destroy your front USB for the rest of the console's life. So be delicate with these ones. All right, we got our long boys we're going to put right back through there that holds the whole thing together. Nice. Give it a little wipey. And then the side that has the Wi-Fi board. Oh, gotta get that nice and clean. All right. And then the side that has the Wi-Fi board, we're gonna wrap this little hook around it, lift the other side until it slides into place, and then carefully press down and back. And that's it. Go ahead and put the screws back in, and we're all done. It's a good looking Xbox One. Just gonna puff away any little bits of dust that have fallen out and gotten loose around there. Make sure they don't find their way back into the system, and it's good. So that one wasn't too bad. We got it all put back together. We got it tested out. It looks like that one clamp on there was the issue. Tightening those legs on that clamp got that whole thing seated nice and firmly, and it stopped it from having any troubles with overheating. I think the thermal compound probably helped as well, but more than anything, I think that X-clamp design that Microsoft has been using since the Xbox 360 is the culprit in this situation. I don't know what about that particular design that they seem to like so much, that it's very different than PlayStation's screwed on clamp. For some reason they've stuck with it, and that little metal spring just kind of loosens up over time. It stops holding everything together firmly, and if you don't have a nice firm connection between your processor and your cooling system, your whole cooling system is just going to be completely unused. Your processor is going to build up that heat. It's not going to send it over to the heatsink where the fan can then blow air over it and cool it off, and so you're going to have the system overheating even if the entire cooling system is in good shape. If that clamp isn't holding it down, it just throws everything out the window. So again, I don't know why they stuck with that one, but either way, it's all fixed up and working now, ready to rock and roll. We're going to be pulling back a little bit on our weekly Filthy Fridays. Last weekend we had Thanksgiving, and this week it's just become a little bit obvious to me that Filthy Friday a week is about our limit, and I'd like to put out other types of videos. So we're going to pull it back a little bit, maybe do a Filthy Friday every now and then. But if you have any other types of videos you guys would like to see from us, anything you'd like us to cover, anything you'd like to learn how to fix, play through together, anything like that, put a comment down below. Let us know what kind of videos you'd like to see from us. And until next time, we'll see you around.